video, we will talk about two variances related to fixed manufacturing overhead. First, the fixed overhead budget variance, and the second one is the fixed overhead volume variance. So let's go ahead and set up a little framework to make these calculations. All right, you can see that this framework has three numbers for fixed overhead that we will calculate. Two of them are really pretty easy. The third one's not as hard, but it does take more effort. All right, so the budgeted fixed overhead is equal to whatever you have on either the budgeted income statement or the flexible budget. Those should always be the same. They will always be the same by definition. So we can just go ahead and set that equal to 7,500. And then the actual fixed overhead will be equal to the actual number on the actual income statement. Now this right here is known as the fixed overhead budget variance. And it's pretty easy to calculate. We'll take the 7,500, subtract from it the 7,250, and if we spend less than what we had planned on, that has a positive impact on profit. So this is a favorable variance. All right, that's a really simple one. So that simplicity is offset a little bit by the slightly more complex fixed overhead volume variance. So to calculate the fixed overhead volume variance, we need to recognize, first of all, that this fixed overhead has been allocated to our inventory, which are wooden tops here. So let's think about how we allocate the fixed overhead. We first would have come up with a fixed manufacturing overhead rate. Okay, and that would be equal to our budgeted fixed overhead cost divided by the total amount of direct labor hours, which we're using to allocate both fixed and variable overhead. So our budgeted direct labor hours are equal to the 0.1 direct labor hours per top times 16,200 tops. Okay, so that's our fixed overhead rate. Now, the way we allocate overhead and apply costs to all of our inventory under a standard costing system is we take that budgeted rate and then we multiply it by the standard amount of overhead that we should have used. Okay, so we should have used 0.1 direct labor hours per top times 15,850 tops. Okay, so we would have allocated $7,337.96 worth of fixed overhead. So the difference between this number here and this number here is known as our fixed overhead volume variance. All right, now this is a little tricky as well, the interpretation of whether it's favorable or unfavorable. Now, on one hand, this number here is less than this number here. And so you may think, hey, that is good, right? We didn't apply as much as what we thought we were going to incur. Well, it's not actually good. The only reason why your applied fixed overhead would be less than your budgeted fixed overhead is if you made and sold fewer units than expected. And all else equal, that has a negative impact on profit. So that means this is unfavorable. All right, so it's set up in the same pattern as before, where if the number on the left is less than the number on the right, then that is an unfavorable variance. So it's set up so you can think of it like that. Being able to use your intuition to interpret that takes a little bit more effort, I think. Now, also, this variance right here is not helpful for explaining our static budget variance. This is helpful for reconciling the books so that we can make sure that the total amount of overhead that is applied is equal to our actual overhead. Okay, so we need to include a journal entry for that. We're not going to talk about that here. The variance that is helpful for explaining this overall static budget variance is the fixed overhead budget variance. And so I'm going to go ahead and add that down here. And that's equal to the $250 favorable. Okay, so that is how you calculate the fixed overhead variances. And again, this fixed overhead budget variance is really pretty easy to calculate, but the fixed overhead volume variance takes a lot more thought. And this is actually oftentimes the bane of students' existence when it comes to standard costing, because it takes a lot of practice. But anyway, there it is. Those are the fixed overhead variances.